Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I'm getting really excited now for my upcoming trip to Italy. Going to be covering so much of Roman history, and I'll be filming a lot of that for the channel. So with that in mind, I've been doing kind of a deep dive of my own into some of the early Roman Empire. I mentioned that the other day as we did a video on Nero. I want to take a step further now and go to what happened next after Nero took his own life at the end of his reign. And we're going to talk about the first real civil war that happens during the time of empire in the Roman world. The Roman Republic had dealt with civil wars, primarily the ones in the aftermath of Julius Caesar, but since Augustus had become emperor, there hadn't really been any division because the men who followed him as part of his dynasty. So it goes Augustus to Tiberius, then to Caligula, and then Claudius, and then Nero. Well, now Nero's gone, and now in his wake is going to be what's called the year of 4 emperors. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This kind of quick succession of men who overthrew one another. And eventually we're going to end up with a little bit of stabilization by the end of the year. So we're going to take a look at the channel Knowledgia. They've got an 11-minute video on the year of the 4 emperors. I'll put the link down in the description so you can check it out without my commentary, as well as any of their other content you might be interested in. Let's go ahead and dive into this one.
The death of Emperor Nero for much of Rome was a day of celebration. Another tyrannical ruler had been ousted once and for all. So, just real quickly to recap, he ends up taking his own life when it becomes clear that there is an uprising that's going to happen. And we talked about this the other day. If you didn't see the video where we covered the story of Nero, I'll put a link down in the description, and we'll throw one up at the end as well, and you can check that out. But Rome would need to yet again pick a new princeps. And this time, the choice was harder than ever. Thus, the empire entered the year of 4 emperors.
And so why is it harder? Because Nero doesn't really have a designated heir the way it had been previously done. He's a great-great-grandson of Caesar Augustus. He's also a descendant of Mark Antony, among others. And so all of these family connections are now gone. And so it's kind of a wide open field. And Galba is the guy that is, sometimes in the aftermath of very strong rulers or very controversial rulers, people want to default to something that's a little safe and a little less kind of in your face. So they go with the old guy that's kind of not really a threat, not going to do any harm, is just kind of a caretaker. And I think for a lot of people, that's how Galba is going to be seen, but he doesn't really do that.
With the rebellion in full swing, as Nero's minutes as a living ruler were waning, the Senate had found their preferred replacement for the doomed emperor. They had chosen the governor of Hispania, who deemed himself General of the Senate and People of Rome, in defiance to the typical title of General of Caesar. His name was Servius Sulpicius Galba, and he was a well-rounded politician and military man known for his sternness and loyalty.
And that sternness is what's going to get him into trouble, is his, I think, as far as emperors go, he's not bad. I mean, he's certainly not Nero. I think he wants to come in a time after Nero and guys like Nero and Tiberius and Caligula, who were really kind of very kind of throwing in your face the lavishness of their lifestyle and really kind of abusing the power that they had as emperor for themselves. Galba is going to come in and he's going to be like the law and order guy, right? He's like the discipline. I'm going to shape this place up and I'm going to get everything back the way it should be. But he goes a little overboard with that.
He was declared the new princeps by the Senate while still in Hispania, and in spite of another claimant by the name of Nymphidius Sabinus attempting to usurp the barely secured throne. The Praetorian Guard took the responsibility of assassinating this pretender,
And there, I hadn't realized just how much of a thing it was for the Roman Empire, but the number of Roman emperors that eventually are killed by their own guard, the Praetorian Guard, is astronomical when you start looking at it. They were the bodyguard. They were the closest. And so if you could get to them and get them to do your dirty work for you, well, it made your job a whole lot easier. And so very often that is where that's going to happen.
while Galba would have to face an ambush from one of Nero's legions on the journey to the capital, he would eventually make his way safely to accept his honor. The problem now was that Galba was not a gentle nor necessarily fair man.
And in the aftermath of this is where him not being in Rome, I think, hurts him, because he's been kind of disconnected from the mob, so to speak. And by the mob, I mean like the people of Rome and the voice of the people and what they've been experiencing. And so he's kind of out of touch with what they were dealing with Nero. And so he comes in not really understanding what led them to hate Nero in the first place. Not that everybody hated Nero, but and I think he kind of makes some serious blunders from the time he gets there.
He had a reputation for harsh discipline and a familiar tyrannical streak that the Roman citizens were oh so tired of. In the short window he had to make a good first impression, he didn't.
No.
He disbanded the German guard, seized properties of innocent Romans, failed to pay the Praetorians properly, handed out death sentences without trials, and seemed to treat the empire as his own little game. His advisors were further criticized as contributing to the string of bad decisions that marked Galba's early reign. But the man himself was just unlikable to many.
And that's the worst combination of things in the aftermath of a guy like Nero. You needed somebody who could come in and let the people rally around them and could be a stabilizing figure and can bring calm to this situation. And when you are not the designated heir and you're not part of that dynasty that has ruled Rome for the better part of 100 years, you have to be so careful about how you go about things. And he just kind of comes in and runs roughshod over everything and opens the door to be challenged.
2 legions of Upper Germany would be the first to launch an open rebellion against the new ruler, followed the next day by those of Lower Germany. The latter went so far as to declare Aulus Vitellius, their governor, to be the true princeps in Galba's place.
And why would Lower Germany be above Upper Germany? Well, that happens a lot because Lower and Upper aren't about North and South geography. Sometimes Lower and Upper can be describing the rivers. And so, for example, in northern Ohio, we have Upper Sandusky and Lower Sandusky. And Lower Sandusky is north of Upper Sandusky because Upper Sandusky means up river. So upriver in this case means going south. It can also mean going up into higher elevation. So there's a lot of different ways you can use the terms upper and lower that have nothing to do with north-south geography.
Now January of 69 AD, 7 months into Galba's reign, it was clear that the emperor chosen by the Senate had been a poor decision. He was unpopular, cruel, and the exact opposite of what Rome was wanting. Consequently, on January 15th, just as they'd done to his challenger, the Praetorian Guard put an end to Galba. It wasn't just the Praetorians who wanted the emperor dead, however. Even allies can turn to enemies if you play your part poorly.
Yep.
Marcus Salvius Otho was one of those men for Galba. At the start of Galba's rebellion against Nero and ascension to the role of princeps, Otho had taken the newcomer's side.
And this is a great example of where Galba doesn't know how to read the room, and that's going to get him in trouble. Otto kind of sees himself as the successor, and he's got the allies to make that happen. And a lot of people think he's going to be named the successor. And well, I'm probably getting ahead of myself because I'm sure he's going to talk about this.
Given the option between Galba or Nero, there was no question. Why would Otho align with the man who'd stolen his wife?
Oh, yeah?
Poppaea Sabina, the notorious mistress of Emperor Nero, was the wife of Otho, until the princeps became so obsessed with the woman he'd been having his affairs with that he forced her and her husband to divorce. It was then that Nero himself married Poppaea, and Otho was sent into exile in Lusitania. Nero did make the humiliated man governor of the province, but Otho
Get rid of him.
would never forgive him.
And then in our story of looking at Nero, remember, Nero is supposed to have, in an argument with Poppaea, kicked her in her pregnant stomach, killing her. And then he goes a few weeks later and sees this pretty young boy, this teenage boy, that looks a lot like her, and he has him mutilated and basically turned into a woman. And then he parades this kid around as his wife. And when Otto becomes emperor, he's going to take that same kid that they call Sporus, and he's going to turn him into his wife as a way of kind of showing that he's taken that authority.
Yet, this meant that Galba had only obtained the governor as an ally due to his own opposition to Nero.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, so don't make me an enemy once the enemy is gone.
Came as no surprise that, in time, Otto's loyalty to his new emperor would fizzle out. After the death of Galba, it would be Otto whom Rome chose to take his place.
So Galba picks a man to be his successor rather than Otto, and that's it. I mean, that's like the final straw. He's going to take the throne for himself now, and so he announces his successor, and he doesn't even last a week after that. He just, like I said, misread the room big time. And Galba's an older guy, and so the idea is he's probably not going to be emperor for very long anyway, and so everybody's thinking about who's going to be next. Well, now he's next.
With great anxiety as to what this decision would bring them. Otto, it appeared, had no intent on subjecting Rome to yet another dictator. This, however, was irrelevant, because Otto wasn't the only man who could make that decision. In fact, he quickly became aware of a precarious predicament. The German legions who had turned their backs on Galba had declared an Aulus Vitellius, former consul and commander of the Germania Inferior Army, as emperor.
Going back all the way to the time of Caesar, what made Caesar such a threat to the Roman Republic? Well, it was the fact that he was a victorious general out on the frontier, winning battles with these men who, many of whom have never even been to Rome, who have lived their whole lives fighting out there for this man. And for them, this is the only leader they've ever known. They don't know Otto, they don't know Galba, they don't know Nero, they don't know those guys except to hear them and to be told that's who their allegiance lies to. So it makes sense that they're going to ally and support the guy that they know, who has led them, rather than some faceless dude back in Rome.
Dangerously ignorant to the spreading revolt on the Rhine, Otto had missed the news that even more legions, spreading to the armies of Britannia, Gaul, and Rhaetia, had joined his challenger. Now marching on Rome, Vitellius and his men found themselves face to face with the defenders of not Galba, but Otto. This would serve as little deterrent, however, and Vitellius was still ready for war. In a drastic and wildly unforeseen turn of events, Otto responded by taking his own life. He is said to have declared, "It is far more just to perish one for all than many for one."
It's a fascinating thing when you start studying all of this, and you see a history of men who lead thousands and tens of thousands to their deaths in order to claim a throne for themselves, and not just in Rome, but throughout history in general. The everyday man dying to put some other rich guy on the throne. And so to have this guy say, I'm going to take my own life rather than plunge you into war and cause a lot of you to die just so one of us can take this empire, is something that many people look on and say, wow, what a selfless thing to do.
It's believed that, realizing the great possibility of a full-fledged civil war at hand, Otto chose to end his own life to spare the lives of all those who'd fight for him. Rome had already seen an exhausting amount of civil war, and the emperor just couldn't bring himself to cause yet another. And so, in death, Otto earned great respect and adoration. But it was in death, and yet again that year, the role of princeps had changed hands.
Still one more to go.
Otto had reigned 3 months, and now it would be Vitellius's turn. All accounts of Vitellius's reign can be questioned as to their fairness, but still, none regard him as much of a beloved ruler.
And as we say all the time, that's going to be true with any account of anything, is understanding the bias and the purpose and the worldview of the person who's writing. And unfortunately, when we get further away from events like this, events 2,000 years ago, while it's actually pretty remarkable how many detailed accounts we do have from this time period, we also don't have so many accounts that we can kind of get a balanced view from a number of different people.
He is known to have expanded the Praetorian Guard utilizing his own men, opening up the imperial administration offices to the Equites, banning astrologers from Rome, giving further honors to the deceased Nero, and allegedly starving his own mother to death.
Not that that's inconsistent with things done by other recent Roman emperors. Again, the Praetorian Guard, we can't overstate the importance of them. Imagine if in American history, out of our 45 men that have been president, 46 presidents, because we count Cleveland twice. Imagine if like a third of them had been killed by their own Secret Service. How much power the Secret Service would wield in a situation like that.
It seems that, though not to be the despotic extreme of some of his predecessors, Vitellius was not exceptionally liked or disliked. Still, the lack of unanimous approval of his position as emperor displayed a hazardous level of disapproval in the least. It thus came as a bit predictable when, in the summer of 69, Vitellius was informed that history was repeating itself.
This time in the
East. A new
East.
emperor had been declared elsewhere, within his empire.
So far we've been talking about guys from the West, right? We're talking Spain, and we're talking up in Germany, France, that area. Now the threat comes from the other side of the empire.
This time, it was the eastern provinces of Rome, in addition to Illyricum and Dalmatia, that would split from the Senate's choice of ruler. They declared in favor of a man by the name of Titus Flavius Vespasianus, a politician and general who had served in the invasion of Britain. This meant that, for the second time, Vitellius was faced with the prospect of a civil war.
And while all this is going on, you've got kind of the final destruction of Judea, the area that today is Israel, with the uprising there in the late part of this decade that's going to be put down in part by Vespasian. And they're going to destroy the temple in Jerusalem. They're going to basically begin the Jewish diaspora that lasts for the next couple of thousand years. And they're even going to change Judea into Palestine as a way of kind of wiping their identity from that place.
And unlike his predecessor, he was willing to plunge Rome into that tumult yet again. The emperor's immediate reaction was to gather a handful of legions who could head east and prevent Vespasianus's men from crossing over into Italy. This led to a decisive defeat of Vitellius's forces and the rapid deterioration of the princeps' defense. Desertions, low morale, and downright betrayal were duplicitously eating away at what remained of Vitellius's army. The steady disintegration of his troops pushed Vitellius to make a humbling decision. Abdication was his only answer.
So his predecessor takes his own life rather than keep this problem going. Vitellius isn't going to go quite that far, but he's willing to step down for the sake of the empire, for the sake of bloodshed. But then a really crazy thing happens. They won't let him. Imagine saying, all right, I don't want any more bloodshed. I don't want this to go any further. I'm out. And they're like, no, you're not. You're not out.
Oddly, though, the Praetorian Guard disagreed. Despite having already come to an agreement with his contender concerning the exchange of power, the Praetorian Guard would halt Vitellius on his way to officially make the transfer. Forced back to his palace, the emperor was given no option but to renew his fight against Vespasianus.
The power of the Praetorian Guard, only in this case, instead of taking the emperor's life, they're forcing him to stay.
With only a meager civilian militia on his side, Vitellius put up his final fight as Vespasianus's men reached the walls of Rome. The battle was horrific. According to the writing of Cassius Dio, 50,000 people would be brutally killed by the end of the fight.
And Cassius Dio is the guy that we get a lot of this information from. And again, there are reasons for him to show certain biases, but there's no reason for us to not trust that the basics of the story are correct.
Both sides took significant casualties, particularly the invaders. And in the end, the bloodshed was for nothing more than the power-hungry goals of another destined ruler.
And it didn't change the outcome that they would have had if Vitellius had just been allowed to walk away in the first place, but a lot less people would have died in the process.
Vitellius was dragged through the streets of Rome before being violently murdered.
He's taken to these steps that are a common place where people are executed, and supposedly that's where he's going to be killed. And those exact steps aren't there anymore, though I do believe there are steps in their place in roughly the same location. I'm going to try to find that spot when I'm there.
Yet I was once your emperor.
Last words.
Was his farewell to the winning side. All the while, as another brutish civil war carried out through Italy on its path straight to the capital, Vespasianus himself was far away, over in Egypt.
Letting other people do his dirty work.
Too, he had been declared emperor already, and on December 21st, 69 AD, the Senate was in agreement. Vespasianus was now Emperor Vespasian.
All right, so there you have it, the story of the year of 4 emperors. There's later on, much later in Rome's history, going to be a year of 5 emperors. We'll talk about that sometime when I learn a little more about that time period. I haven't gotten that far yet. So let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. I'll throw up some links to some other videos here that you can check out. New video up on Stories of the Great War, my original content channel. Concerning World War I. It's me and some of my friends going down into some World War I mines, French and German mines at a place called Vauquois, which is in eastern France. It was a really cool experience. Highly recommend if you ever get the opportunity to do that. It's only open one weekend a month to do that, but it was a lot of fun. So check out Stories of the Great War. The link's down in the description. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.